In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay. What a powerful way to start the show today. Welcome everyone to Building for Digital Equity, or B4DE. I'm Regina Cooper Benjamin, or Gina, Deputy Director at the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, or NDIA. At NDIA, we advance digital equity by supporting community programs and equipping policymakers to act. We provide spaces and opportunities for our community of over 2,000 affiliates to come together for education, learning, fellowship, and fun. We listen and we learn from our affiliates, then we create publicly available tools and resources. Nothing is behind a paywall for anyone to discover. On the other side of that, we talk to policymakers and share what's happening in communities. We work with practitioners and policymakers because we believe that everyone should be able to safely navigate the digital world in a way that is meaningful for them. To this end, we educate, provide tools and resources on low-cost internet, strong device ecosystems with low-cost options, digital skills training, and technical support. In addition to all of that, we like to make good trouble necessary trouble. That's obviously a reference to the esteemed late U.S. Congressman John Lewis, who is a friend of Dr. King, who we are honoring at today's B4DE. The quick update is that NDIA is in a suit against the Trump administration to reinstate the Digital Equity Act competitive grant program to achieve its original intent. The last decision from the court was to sever race from covered populations to have the program continue. To be clear, while we celebrate the continuation of the program, we don't agree with the decision to sever race, and that part of the decision still stings a great deal. On Monday, NDIA and the Trump administration have shared a joint report with the judge in the case about what both sides would like to have happen as the program resumes and moves forward with prompt and faithful implementation, consistent with the competitive program's original goals and purposes. Okay, there's another update, Sean.
Well, give it to us.
Okay, today the judge issued a pause or stay in the lawsuit while the NOFO or Notice of Funding Opportunity is coming out. The judge is requiring regular check-ins from both parties around the NOFO. This does not mean the lawsuit is over. The lawsuit is not over. We're still in the middle of the lawsuit, but it's paused until after the NOFO is released or January 15th, whichever one comes first. To learn more about what NDIA is doing in relation to the lawsuit, join the NDIA listserv or community call on Friday for more details. You can also reference articles and resources from Benton, the National Skills Coalition, and other NDIA partners. Okay, now that I've said all that, I'm going to get into the program. Ready, Sean?
I'm ready. I am ready.
I'm here with my co-host, Sean Gonzalez, Associate Director for Communications with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, or ILSR, Community Broadband Networks Program. Thanks for joining us live. If you're watching on YouTube, please drop your questions in the chat. We love questions. We'll be pulling from those throughout the show. If you're on Facebook or LinkedIn, we see you too. But the liveliest conversation is happening on YouTube. So hop on over there and you can post your questions to YouTube. Today's episode is called Normalcy, Never Again. We are 8 days out from the 63rd anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s address on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. A speech that was not a call to make peace with inequality, but a call to dismantle it structurally. So today, we're asking the digital equity movement a pointed question. What's your dream? And what kind of ecosystems do we need to finally build a beloved, connected community? Sean, do you want to take the table? What do you have for us?
Yeah, let's set the table and get us all in a king and queen state of mind. So tens of millions of Americans are still without reliable, affordable internet or digital skills training or devices. And none of that's an accident of geography or the market. I mean, it's really a result of choices. The Affordable Connectivity Program, the $30 a month discount for off of monthly internet bills for low-income households that 23 million American households were taking advantage of, is still in its grave. The Digital Equity Act, which you just talked about, federal funding support for many programs around digital skills training and device support, et cetera, is still alive, but is with an uncertain future. And then BEAD, the $42 billion flagship funding program to build new networks, restructured, labor and equity protections stripped out, quality standards lowered. Meanwhile, the word modernization is being used by telecom monopolies to justify walking away from universal service obligations. But today isn't really a status update. It's a gut check. We're not here to normalize any of this. Normalcy never again, which is the actual title of King's dream speech. You know, and Gina, like I've been thinking about something that Chris Mitchell, the director of our program here at ILSR, Community Networks program here, said to me this morning. And he was talking about how when he thinks about King, he thinks about how unpopular he was during the civil rights era. I mean, King was vilified, especially if when he expanded, his focus and launched the Poor People's Campaign. And I was thinking, he's right. I mean, and for our work, it may not always be as popular as puppies. It might even be vilified, but it's vital that we keep pressing forward, and that's why we're here today. Now, someone who's fed our spirits and helped keep us moving forward is poet extraordinaire and no stranger to B4D, Cook County Director of Digital Equity, Kyla Williams-Tate. We invited her to light us up with her poetry, but unfortunately she wasn't able to be here with us. But we still want to send her our love and encourage you to check out her work that really paints a beautiful and moving picture of beloved community connections, to borrow Dr. King's phrase. The human infrastructure, the people-to-people connections that fuel our dreams for digital equity. It's called Collaborative, with art in all caps in the word. And Jordan, our producer, going to ask him to drop the link in the chat, and you guys can check out her work. It's very inspiring. And just before we dive into the meat of the program, I want to suggest that even if you've read it before, to go back and read Martin's letter from Birmingham jail. It's not poetry, but it is a poetic plea written to clergy members who had been saying to King, all that protesting and marching was unwise and untimely. And in it, as he did in many other places, he makes a case for direct action. Not this sugary, sentimental, kumbaya, let's all hold hands and get along stuff, which is what so many King remembrances have been reduced to. So, Gina, how are we going to dive into our King-inspired program today?
Okay. Well, I have a few things. So first, I want to give a shout out to Sam, who said hi to both of us in the comments. So hi, Sam. See you in the comments. If you say hi to Sean and I, maybe we'll say your name live on B4DE too. So engage with us, say hi to us. But we are going to start off with Christine Parker. She's really, her work in data visualization is amazing. She's been doing it for years now, right, Sean? She is ILSR's senior GIS analyst and was key in putting together the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP dashboard, that gave us a zip code level view of enrollment before that program expired. That was a tool, a data tool, that a lot of us used during the ACP wind down period, like as we were getting closer to spending up all the money. And lately, she's been digging into something striking: the digital landscape along Martin Luther King boulevards across the country. This is so fascinating to me, Sean, because I sometimes think, how do people get into the research they do? Like, I've heard people ask questions and be like, how did you even think to ask that question? Like, so I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. Welcome, Christine. We're looking forward to you walking us through what you found, how you asked this question. Like, how did you come up with this question to answer for all of us? And then, just interested in hearing more from you about this particular work.
Thanks, Gina. I'm excited to be here today. This project came about, I don't know, Sean, maybe a couple of years ago. I came across some researchers that are focused on the kind of phenomenon of renaming places after Martin Luther King, and I was really interested in using that as a lens through which we could evaluate connectivity. So that's what I'm going to talk about here today. And across the US, there are more than 800 cities that have taken on this endeavor to name a road or street or rename it after Martin Luther King. And if anyone who is listening is in a community that has done that, please drop the name of your city in the chat and we can see how many we can collect in there. Often that research around this phenomenon is about the demographics, the who that is in those communities. They also dive a lot into some of the stigma that revolves around the process of renaming because it was sometimes quite contentious. I won't be getting into much of that. Unfortunately, I only have a few minutes, but I'm happy to dig into that with folks at another time if you'd like to. And so to do this analysis, I used a national database of addresses and collected any that had Martin Luther King named theming. And so I ended up with more than 37,000 addresses. When I combined those with internet availability data from the FCC's Broadband data collection, which keep in mind is ISP self-reported information, so may not always be accurate, I found that at those addresses, 98% supposedly have a reliable high-speed option. And by reliable, we're saying, you know, it has some like fiber, cable, or maybe licensed fixed wireless access. So we're calling that good service for the sake of this talk. So, you know, it appears like there's no issue here, right? The reality is that more than half of those locations with good service have only one or two good options. And when you have this lack of competition, you end up with an affordable service and or poor quality service. So it's a barrier to people accessing the internet. And I was curious, I wanted to dig in a little more. I wanted to know, are the providers who are offering service along these roads offering consistent levels of service across them? And I found that the top two providers who both offer service to more than 20,000 of these Martin Luther King named locations, they offer actual good, reliable service to less than 30% of each of their respective locations. Not great, right? So we're going to dig in a little further, a little deeper with a specific example. Atlanta, where you can go visit King's childhood home, and they have like a National Park Service monument there. Atlanta, Georgia, named a road that extends westward from Atlanta out to the boundary of Fulton County. It's Martin Luther King Boulevard, I believe, or is it Drive? Oh, forgive me. And we're focusing on AT&T, one of those top two providers I just mentioned. And you'll notice this kind of squiggly line that's appearing made up of these blue circles, which are our good service locations offered by AT&T. And the X's are also AT&T served locations, but a lower quality service. One thing you might notice along this line is we have a sort of trend of going from blue in the more eastern part, the right-hand side of that road, and as you head west towards the left, you see a lot more red, so locations with lower quality. Another thing you might notice in this map, you're seeing like some shades of gray and some percentages. Those are indicating the percent of population that is Black in those areas. And I can't dig in more to demographics and other issues that are going along with this, but again, I'm really happy to dig in with this with folks another time if you're interested. But lots of patterns happening here. The one I wanted to really dig in further to was, are we seeing a difference? You know, I'm wondering if there is any consistency that AT&T is offering here, which we can already see there's not a lot. So I took a couple addresses, one from the west end, one from the east end of this road, and put them into AT&T's shopping page and pulled up their broadband nutrition labels. And I'll let you take a guess. I can't see the chat, but I'll let folks take a guess. Which do you think has competition? The one on the left or the one on the right? And if you guessed the one on the right, yes, this is the location which has 4 different service tiers on AT&T's fiber service. Starts at a lower price with a lower equipment fee, and there are 2 other good service options there. Google Fiber and Comcast both offer higher quality service there. So there's actual competition at this location. So it's more affordable, and there's lots of good quality options. Whereas the location in the western part of this road has a slightly higher fee, and it's all AT&T is offering there is a fixed wireless option. They have one good service option there through Comcast, and that's it. So this is a really good example of what it means to have what competition actually can do. It means you have better options and better prices, and ultimately those things make access. It's not just about the wires.
Amen.
Thank you. And so when Martin Luther King was working on his dream speech, I don't think he would have imagined that our dream today would be being able to virtually connect with your doctor, or submit a job application online, or create a website to sell your bespoke dog beds that are human-sized. And we're not there yet, not for everyone, right? And that's what we're here to talk about today. We're still working toward that goal. We're pushing for better digital equity policy, more affordability policy, to reinstate the Digital Equity Act, and to teach people how to use digital tools and navigate the internet. Because I think once a person has the ability to connect with the world, virtual or otherwise, in the way that they need and want to, that's when they are able to really participate. And I think that is the goal we're all here to continue seeking today. So thank you.
Thank you, Christine. And shout out to Wanda, who said hi to us in the chat. Hi, Wanda. Christine, this what you just spoke about reminded me a lot of when I first got to NDIA. I read a report that was done by Angela, our executive director, and Bill, where they did a digital redlining report calling out the same provider. This is like, at least, if I've been here for 5 years, this is over 7 years ago, they did this report, right? Same provider, kind of same patterns you're describing, except they did it in Cleveland. And so, yeah, did you use that? Like, I'm just curious, did you make any connections between that report and the work you're doing, or the work you did, or,
I didn't actually. So it was coincidental, not. But it doesn't surprise me that we'd see this theme elsewhere. It's not surprising. And I was telling Sean when I was working on this that it was disappointingly easy to find that example. Those were the first locations I picked when I was looking for an example to share on the pricing. So it's very clear that this lack of competition is really making internet inaccessible for folks,
right,
in different ways than just not having a physical infrastructure. So it's certainly an important thing we need, but focusing on affordability and the skill set as well, I think are still things we really need to work on.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quickly is, we're calling out this one particular provider or making an example here, but it's certainly not, they may have a monopoly in certain areas, but they don't have a monopoly on this practice. It reminds me of when Digital Equity LA and then the markup also did something similar, where they looked at the discrepancy in pricing and found that, you look here at your slide there in Atlanta, in the western part of the city, I think, where, tends to be concentrations of more African Americans, higher poverty rates, and they're being charged more for, like less options, less quality options. And it's just striking.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't see any questions in the comments. So thank you, Christine, for being with us. Sean, do you want to introduce our next segment?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. So let's talk about a word that's doing a lot of work right now: modernization. It sounds neutral, sounds kind of cool, sounds like progress, but it's also being used to justify retiring copper lines without adequate replacements and gutting consumer protections. So our next guest is with the California Alliance for Digital Equity, aka CADE, and she's here to paint a picture on the difference between real modernization and the version that's being sold to us. So let's welcome now Lindsay Skolnick. How you doing, Lindsay?
Hey, Sean. Hey, Gina. Thanks so much for having me today. It's good to see you both.
Yes.
All right. So as Sean mentioned, I'm here to talk a little bit about AT&T's fight to eliminate carrier of last resort, which is also known as KOLR in California, and the way that the ISP is using the language of modernization to ultimately achieve their goals. Now, if you're unfamiliar with KOLR, let me walk it back a little bit and explain what this rule is. So a carrier of last resort in California is a provider that is required by the California Public Utilities Commission to offer basic phone service to anyone who asks for it in their service territory, no matter what they live or what their income is. Ultimately, this helps ensure that all of our residents have access to services like voice calls, 911 services, operator services, and more. There's about 16 different providers in California that operate as KOLRs. AT&T is the biggest with the broadest service territory in the state, and they tend to offer basic service via traditional landlines or copper landlines. Now, why is KOLR important? It's a consumer protection, first and foremost. This is something that ensures folks that live in mountainous regions, rural areas, or perhaps under-resourced or historically marginalized communities have basic phone service when they need it most. This is also a public safety issue when you're thinking about making sure that folks have access to emergency communications during disasters like wildfires, which is unfortunately something California experiences almost year-round now. And we know that this is really important on the public safety level because according to recent reports from the state, roughly 1 million emergency calls still go out over landlines per year, which means these landlines matter, especially in the moments that you need them most. And then finally, it's important when it comes to service quality. KOLR rules require a high standard of service quality so that you can rely on that phone line, again, when it's most important to access it. Now, talking a little bit about the language of modernization and how it's being used to advance AT&T's interests on this issue. So as Sean mentioned earlier, most people associate modernization with progress, improvements, enhancements, often positive things. And in our mind, AT&T knows this and is using that as a guise to get what they want when it comes to KOLR. One of their biggest claims to try to eliminate their obligation to serve as a KOLR is that these requirements and rules are standing in the way of what they say are important connectivity upgrades. But in reality, we know that this claim could not be farther from the truth. The CPUC itself has been on the record stating that KOLR rules in California do not block upgrades. AT&T can modernize their landline networks when they choose to do so. They are simply required to upgrade it with technology that is equal or better in terms of reliability. So ultimately, we know that's not the truth. And this modernization claim is misinfo, bad information that we are constantly trying to push back on at this point, and ultimately often is masking the true interests here, which are AT&T's push to kind of increase its bottom line. We know that maintaining landline networks across the state is quite expensive for AT&T. They want to be able to pick and choose where they offer service to whom with what plans, and these types of rules, these consumer protections, stand in the way. Now, what is AT&T doing today to try to get what they want with KOLR? Right now, they have a multi-front strategy in place that is happening at both the state level and the federal level to eliminate or change Kohler rules. First, they've actively pursued legislation over the last few years. A bill this year was held early in session relating to Kohler in California. And a lot of those attempts in the legislature have failed to date, largely thanks to a huge opposition group or coalition that Cade and many other of our partners are involved in. There's also an active CPUC proceeding underway to change Kohler rules, and AT&T is very involved in that to try to get what they want in terms of Kohler relief. And then additionally, on the federal side, AT&T has actually sued the state of California, challenging the state's authority to require the company to serve as a Kohler and provide this basic service. And they have filed multiple petitions with the FCC to say, hey, you should be able to preempt state rights on this issue, which is a big concern, because while we know this is about maintaining consumer protections in California, this is also becoming a states' rights issue. If AT&T wins and we see that they get what they want at the federal level, this could bring into question whether states can protect their own residents at all in this type of way. Now, what happens if AT&T's modernization argument and their efforts are successful? Looking back, we know that studies have shown internet service providers in California and elsewhere have often offered slower and more expensive service to high poverty minority neighborhoods, while wealthier white areas get faster, more affordable service. This is a concern because we know that Kohler rules have non-discrimination elements baked into them. If Kohler is removed, folks like AT&T could potentially be more free to choose where they offer coverage, when, and how. Another thing that I think is worth noting is, AT&T is already almost audaciously assuming that they're going to win this fight. They've been sending notices out to folks in California, residents who live in areas where they're relying on this type of basic landline service, that saying, hey, your landlines are going to get cut soon and we need to move you to a new service. A lot of different legislators are getting constituent calls. Folks are really concerned and fearful about what this means if an emergency strikes and they no longer have their landline to stay connected. So that just makes our fight even more important to continue to push on today. Now, what do we want? What does actual modernization in our mind look like? Both Cade's and from many of our other partners in California. First, we're not asking for copper landlines to stay in place. We simply want A, Kohler rules to be preserved, the consumer protection to be reserved, and B, any replacement technology to just be as good so folks have that reliable connectivity when they need it. Kohler rules were designed to be tech neutral, and this is exactly why. They wanted to make sure, and the PUC wanted to make sure, hey, you can update things as long as that reliability is still there. Additionally, as I mentioned, there's an active CPUC proceeding to change Kohler rules in California right now. We want to see that process play out without any intervention from the federal level. Many community and digital advocates have provided significant input on that proceeding, saying this is how these service standards could change while protecting consumer interests. And we want to make sure that the proceeding continues so that these rules can be reformed in a way that consider that input. We don't think that AT&T should by any means be able to, steamroll outside input to get what's best for the company. Now, to quickly tie it back to why we're here today, with Martin Luther King's historic speech, thinking about what he's telling us in terms of rejecting being told to wait patiently for justice or on someone else's timeline. That's exactly what Cade and many of the other partners in California are doing now. We refuse to work on AT&T's timeline as they continue to try to steamroll our opposition and push for what is in the company's best interests, but not necessarily consumers' best interests in California. We recognize that there's a real deep urgency in preserving Kohler today. It's a decades-old safety net. And we'll continue to kind of fight the fight this year and as many more years as we really need to make sure these consumer protections are maintained. Now, this effort is very much so underway and will continue on into the next few months. If you want to keep an eye on what's moving, definitely follow what's happening with the lawsuit and the FCC fights. And then for my friends and allies in California, we welcome you to, use this QR code on the slide to provide public comment in support of Kohler on the CPUC page. I know it looks a little daunting when you get to that page, but I have some quick step-by-step kind of instructions here that you can use to very easily add a public comment and say, we support Kohler. We want to see these rules modernized at the CPUC. And we know, as I said here, real modernization doesn't leave people behind. And that's it for my presentation today. Thank you so much, Sean and Gina, for having me and letting me speak a little bit about our Kohler reform fight in California.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay. Totally agree. And so many lawsuits, and still not enough.
You know?
Suing. Lindsay, I did have, oh man, I lost the question I have for you though. Sean, I think you have a question. I did have, oh man, I hate when I do that. I should have written.
No worries, maybe it'll come back.
Maybe it'll come back to you. That's what always happens, right? It'll probably come back to you like as soon as we're done or something. But anyway, it wasn't really a question, but a comment from Samantha Smarchin. She's the director of philanthropic programs at Connect Humanity, a friend and ally of ours. And she just talked about, just this issue resonates far beyond, California. She talked about it impacting landline phone lines in deep rural areas where there's no alternative communication channel, no reliable internet. Can you imagine what that means for emergency needs? Indeed, especially when you see wildfires and flooding and all of these kind of things. So this is certainly an important issue to highlight. Gina, I don't know if it came back to you or not, but
it didn't. It's okay. I might email you later, Lindsay, and be like, I remembered. But for now,
no worries.
Thank you for being with us today, Lindsay. Really appreciate having you here.
Of course. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Okay, Sean, you ready for segment 3?
Yeah, exactly. This is going to be an interesting discussion. That question really, like who gets to define progress and who pays for when they get it wrong, is the perfect bridge really into our roundtable discussion today. We've got 3 people joining us who have spent their careers asking exactly those kind of questions from different vantage points: research, policy advocacy, and on the ground level work of actually building networks. So we should bring them in. What do you think, Gina?
Yeah. Where are you at? Okay, there we go. Okay, I am so happy to introduce our 3 panelists today. Dr. Colin Rhinesmith, Associate Professor of Information Sciences, the Director of the Digital Equity Action Research Lab at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and author of the brand new book, Digital Equity Ecosystems, How Community Coalitions Reduce Inequality and Strengthen Democracy. Elisa Valentin, the new program manager at Open Society Foundations and former Broadband Policy Director at Public Knowledge and co-author of The Blueprint for Equitable Digital Participation, a report built entirely on focus groups and survey data from low to middle income households across 4 states. And last but not least, Krista Shute, Executive Director of NEK Community Broadband of Vermont Communications Union District with 72 towns, behind the Groton Connectivity Hub and its fiber-connected privacy pods. We're going to get into a little bit about all of their work now, and I think I'll start with, thank you all for being here. Elisa, I think I'll start with you though. So in the blueprint, it's built on work of people in Denver, Atlanta, New Mexico, and Appalachia and Ohio. Not just surveys, but I know that you went out into communities and you did some roundtables and focus groups. What's one story or quote from those interactions with community members that you think captures the dream these communities are asking for?
Yeah. So thank you, Gina and Sean, for having me. I'm really happy to be back at the Building for Digital Equity webinar. And this time, as you mentioned, I'm in a new role as program manager on our rights and economic renewal opportunity at Open Society Foundations. And I literally just started 4 weeks ago, so I'm brand new. But a few months before I joined OSF, I collaborated on publishing the Blueprint for Equitable Digital Participation with friends at National Digital Inclusion Alliance and Unidos US. And we really focused on understanding the real experiences that people have with the internet and with internet-enabled ecosystems. And, kind of like the genesis of this project was that we feel as though, in a lot of ways, the federal policymaking space in Washington, D.C., particularly as it relates to tech and telecom, is too often shaped by corporate interests. And those interests oftentimes end up kind of preserving power structures that really perpetuate stale and inaccurate narratives about how people experience technology. And that result is a disconnect between policy and people's lived realities, with a lot of resources and solutions that fail to meaningfully meet the needs of everyday people. And in that process, the authentic voices of low income and middle income households are too often erased, or they're challenged, or they're misconstrued, which really makes it harder for experiences that they have to shape the policies and systems that impact their everyday lives. So we wanted to make sure that what we presented in this moment of extreme policy change are recommendations that really pass what we call the kitchen table test. So the blueprint for equitable digital participation is really about confronting systemic exclusion by centering the community wisdom, not from the ivory tower, right, but from the people. And something that emerged quite often was the theme of affordability. That is a central challenge that we heard from focus groups across the nation, with participants consistently noting that cost is a significant ongoing barrier to broadband adoption. A lot of folks discuss the financial pressures that their households face when basic household needs end up competing. When we were in Atlanta, Georgia, there was one participant, a father, who said that he has 5 kids and a wife, and he's the only one who works. And he said, in quote, "So $40 a month is pushing it. It's limiting on what's in the refrigerator, a utility bill, water, electricity. So it's either put food on the table for 6 people or have internet." So in starting this new position that I'm in at Open Society Foundations, where I'm leading the tech portfolio on our rights and economic renewal opportunity, I really feel compelled to continue this approach of centering human dignity when we're talking about technology, not as an afterthought, though, but as a starting point. And all the energy that we're seeing around topics in the tech and telecom sector, I think really kind of serves as a vessel for exploring much broader questions, such as the questions around the concentration of resources, around, the battle of who controls the narrative, how that narrative fuels policies, and ultimately questions about power. And it really raises something that one of my favorite writers, I'm a huge fan of, Tressie McMillan Cottom, has discussed. She has talked about, in this moment, we really need to consider who benefits from telling the story and selling the story that the future is already settled, when in reality, the future is deeply unsettled. And that means that we really do have the opportunity and we have the responsibility to shape it differently.
Wow. Well said. Well said. Let's bring Colin in. And it's really piggybacking on Gina's question to you, Elisa. So Colin, your book, which includes 5 original case studies of digital equity ecosystems across the country, argues that digital equity ecosystems, not just individual programs, are what really reduces inequality. So my question to you is, what's the difference between a program and an ecosystem, and why that distinction matters?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. It is so great to be with everyone today, amazing speakers and this amazing community. So thank you for inviting me. So I think when we, oftentimes when we think about a program, we'll think of an after-school program or a digital skills program in the digital equity space. And these programs are often run by a single organization, such as the public library or another organization. It can also involve a few different partnerships, for example. But an ecosystem, on the other hand, really involves interactions between and among several different organizations who run programs, also often working alongside individuals who are from the community where programs are offered, right? So, this ecosystem might involve, again, organizations that provide affordable internet service and devices, digital skills training. But an ecosystem, again, it really involves those individual community members who are often the sort of, what I refer to as network weavers, what people have talked about, but the digital equity champions, right? That really kind of are those trusted people in community that people look up to in doing this work. And so, as you mentioned in the book, I highlight 5 community coalitions across the United States that really work to keep these ecosystems healthy. And this distinction really matters for digital equity work to be successful, because we know it quite literally takes a village or several villages, right, in a region to help lead, support, and sustain these healthy digital equity ecosystems over time. And it's even more important to make sure those impacted or most impacted by digital inequalities, as Elisa was talking about, to be involved and participate in these efforts to reduce inequality and advance digital equity, as I saw for the research in my book. So it's also therefore important for policymakers and other funders to know that digital equity work is about more than one single program, right? It's really about supporting these community-wide digital equity ecosystems to address both digital and social inequalities.
Thank you, Colin. And so I want to acknowledge, because as we move, I'm going to ask Krista a question, but I think they both these questions touch on a kind of a commonality, which is like the important role of essential community infrastructure, and whether that's a coalition or, to Krista, when we're talking about the Groton Connectivity Hub, which is not just fiber, we're talking about these privacy pods that community members can access for telehealth appointments, court appearances, domestic violence calls, and recovery support. Mm-hmm. Can you briefly tell us how your communications union district built it, and how you got from we need to pass more addresses to designing infrastructure around these specific human needs?
Yes, super. Thanks, Gina. I think it's really important to explain what a communications union district is, because not all of the country knows what we are yet. Right. But in Vermont, towns can form a communications union district, and that district has the right to bring service to the community. And the district itself is formed of board members from each of those towns. So every town in your district, regardless of its size, has representation on your board. So I have 72 voting members. As you can see, we're 72 towns and over 120 board members if you take into consideration all the alternates. So we have a mission to get to the unserved. And Christine spoke earlier about the importance of competition. And when you're in these really rural areas, it's really expensive to build the fiber there. And you really can't build multiple rounds of fiber there. And so what Vermont has done through the Vermont Community Broadband Board, through the governor's office, through the legislature, who's provided, the support and the foundation for this, is to make the statement that we're going to invest these public grant dollars into public infrastructure so that the results of that get reinvested into the community, and we're motivated to lower cost. So when profits come in, prices come down. So that's just sort of setting the stage for what that looks like. And our primary focus is on fiber. Get the fiber out, get the connectivity, get everybody able to access it. But we know firsthand, and we're making great progress. And with the BEAD funding, we'll have funding to get to every unserved address in our district. But we do know firsthand that connectivity alone doesn't solve the access challenge that's facing so many rural Vermonters. It's got to be paired with services and infrastructure that can make that connectivity meaningful, or it has to enable people to actually use that connectivity. So we put in place an ACP and affordable connectivity replacement as a bridge to just help lower the cost to Vermonters in our district. But that's also not enough, because there's a lot of resources that are shutting down in our communities, in our rural communities, because of costs: hospitals, clinics, courts. So when we think about the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, thinking about, if you can't access health, do you have the right of life? If you can't access the court system, do you have the right of liberty? If you can't, if you're unable to connect to your family members and to your community, are you able to pursue happiness? And so just wanted to pull that back into this theme. the way to do that is you've got to address the three legs of the stool that were mentioned earlier by Sean, in a way, right? Like you have to have the access, but you also need to have the skills training, and you need to have devices. You have to be able to get online. Everything has become so digitized. So when Sean mentioned the letter from Birmingham, that's like the playbook, right? Gather the facts, talk things out, prepare yourself, take direct action. And so what our community did was we reached out and said, hey, board members, who wants to reach deep into your community? And Groton stepped up with, hey, we're going to do these surveys. They had integral connections into everybody in town, and they knew the needs of their community. So they gathered those facts about what was needed and brought like 30 letters of support to the table. And we talked things out with what was needed, developed a grant for the USDA Community Connect grant, which there's another round out there open for other communities out there. I urge you to look. And that funding funded the Groton Hub. And then we took that and stepped further and said, what are we going to do with that? We put the hub inside of a low-income housing facility. So it's on the bottom floor of a low-income housing apartment by Rural Edge. And we focused on 5 core areas: providing space for people to come in, providing devices inside the pod, so you have a private place to have a telehealth conversation if you don't have privacy at home. Because I don't know about your house, but in my house, I can hear things through the walls. And then the device is also both in the hub itself, but in the privacy pod as well. So there's a direct connection, and it's providing digital AI literacy, safety programming, and healthcare programming, healthcare connections. So connections with our regional hospitals and safety. So,
thank you. I was just thinking about, I was talking to you before, and writing the story about the Groton Connectivity Hub, and I just love the you grounding this ecosystem work in real life examples on the ground of the work that you're doing in Vermont. So let me just follow up with you, Krista, because I know you said when I wrote about that story, you had said that you had to get creative because rural communities don't always have a school or a library to build around. So how do you actually find partners like housing authorities or fire departments and get them to say, yes?
I mean, the key is your community, right? Like the key for us is our governing board members, because they're the ones that are appointed by their select boards to be on our boards, and they're connected into their communities. So that was the first and foremost frontline piece. But the second is also those state and regional connections, right? Whether it's the Vermont Community Broadband Board or your legislators or the other people that are in that, the economic development folks that are in that region. And when people know that you're fighting for something, that you want to make something work, they bring stuff to the table. So in this case, it really was a huge piece done by the governing board members in that area. They had deep community connections, but they also did those surveys that I mentioned and literal door knocking to find out, what do people need? What is your barrier, and how do we solve that? And there are a lot of rural towns, especially, that they don't even have schools. Like, we're looking at a consolidation of schools in Vermont that's alarming because of costs, and libraries might be open 2 or 3 hours. So we have to start getting creative on where we find locations. Like, is it a town clerk, or, is it even a private company that can offer an opening at the front of where they are, or a general store is another place that we're looking at, because a lot of these general stores, they don't sell as much general stuff as they did back in the day. So that's what we mean by getting creative. But it's important that we get closer to the people that need the access, because many don't have the ability for long distance transportation and other things. We need to get closer to where they are.
Gina,
Yeah. So thank you for that. I think the thing that the reminder that you just gave me is that, we often talk about anchor institutions and what that looks like for communities. And what you just reminded me of is that, like, depending on where you are, I often think of schools as like, okay, if I needed to find an anchor in a community, I'm going to a school first or a library. But we have communities that don't have any of those. And so, I just think that this, you just highlighted some of the gaps that I'm going to ask you about, Elisa, in some of your work. So the blueprint points to how the digital divide compounds housing instability, healthcare access, and education gaps. We know that those things don't exist in isolation. And one of your key findings is that the past policy approaches have failed because they don't center community wisdom. This is, we know, short-sightedness across the board a lot of the time, right? Can you give us a concrete example of a solution communities proposed themselves, something, DC hasn't even tried to try, that you think would actually work?
Yeah, I think I would put this in the category of something that hasn't been tried at scale or sustained over the long term, rather than something that hasn't been tried at all, because there's always, someone trying a little bit, maybe in the corner of an agency or whatever the case may be. But that is the idea of fully integrating how we address people's experiences with technology into the broader ecosystem of community needs. There's a lot of community-based organizations and individuals across the organization that have the country have really demonstrated what this can look like when you have digital inclusion efforts that are embedded within trusted institutions where people already go for help with housing or help with childcare or food assistance or other essential services. The barriers to participation end up coming down, right? So rather than requiring people to navigate a separate system for every need, we can create something closer to a one-stop shop. And I think that approach really recognizes an important reality, which is that digital access and digital adoption are a through line across nearly every single issue area. People are not experiencing in their lives like these artificially separated categories that are created by funding streams or government programs. They're experiencing their needs all at the same time. So I really think that community organizations and individuals understand this in ways that Washington often has not, or that they just have refused to act on. And policymakers have really yet to fully grapple with the fact that it's expensive to be poor. And one of the most precious resources that folks end up wasting is time, because people are forced to navigate really fragmented systems, fill out paperwork over and over again, travel between agencies, spend hours trying to access services that they may already qualify for. And I think in the era of artificial intelligence, the stakes are only becoming higher. And rather than using technology to reduce those burdens, we're seeing a lot of new hurdles that are emerging. And there's a lot of people who are trying to make money and are making money from selling these surveillance systems and these automated decision-making systems that really fail to center human dignity. And it really risks turning over people's futures to lists of ones and zeros, right? So I think that we should really spend time and resources building systems that make it easier and not harder for people to access the support they need. And that's what we were constantly hearing across the country when we were doing these focus groups. And at the end of the day, it's about having practical, common sense solutions that really improve the material conditions of people across the country, and that really allow them to see in tangible ways the ways that government can work with them rather than working against them.
Well said. Well said. And by the way, shameless plug on our Unbuffered podcast, our weekly podcast. We've got an interesting conversation that Chris had with a journalist around flock cameras and what have you. It reminded me when you mentioned surveillance. But let me turn back now to Colin. So you've just heard two versions of ecosystem building, really. And so across the 5 case studies in your book, is there a common ingredient that predicts whether like an ecosystem survives, like in a big city or in a rural county?
Well, so I thank you for asking the question. I have a chapter in my book on this to answer this question. So thank you, Sean. Related to healthy digital equity ecosystems. I mean, I look to answer this question from the 5 case studies that I have. I learned that, and again, drawing from functional ecology in particular, because, one of the things in the book that I really tried to critique and press on is like this idea of ecosystems. Like, what do we really mean by that, right? It's kind of a, big fancy sounding word, and I tried to unpack it in the book. But I did it in a way that was respectful of our natural world. And so I looked to functional ecology and concepts from functional ecology to help us understand that. And some of the things that I learned from talking with coalitions really resonated in the ways that we think about our natural world. So for example, and to answer your question, one of the things that I talk about in terms of healthy digital equity ecosystems is, the fact that much like ecosystems in our natural world that need the sun, right, to fuel healthy ecosystems, in digital equity ecosystems, we need people power, right? We need those champions, those network weavers that are trusted, that listen to people in their communities. One of the things I heard again and again by that, we talk about the importance of relationships in communities, but what does that actually look like, right? And so when the coalition leaders who I talked to in my book, they told me that essentially community members had them on speed dial, right? So it's that accessibility to leadership in coalitions, but in ecosystems, that is the kind of trust and that sort of the bond that people who can afford or live in, as we saw Christine's maps and as we've been talking about with digital discrimination and digital redlining, people who live in particular neighborhoods that may be impacted by that, having that through line, having that direct connection so that folks can be activated, right, in the ways that we heard about for sort of larger advocacy efforts. So it's that level of relationship, that deep, deep relationship where you are willing to, not just willing to, but you are ready to essentially connect with people on a very basic human level. And, that energy is so important. The second thing is diversity. And what I mean by that also very specifically drawing from functional ecology is that ecosystems in our natural world need diverse ecosystems. We need lots of sort of different parts of the ecosystem to create things like functioning food webs, right? Or interactions between plants and animals. In a digital equity ecosystem, we need those assets in the community from a diverse group of individuals and organizations who come to the table to do this work in many different ways. That helps to sustain ecosystems during challenging times. And then third, resilience. Now, resilience is not a new concept when we talk about social movements. The brilliant Adrienne Marie Brown talks about resilience in her work on emergent strategy. In what I found with digital equity ecosystems, resilience really looks like the work of digital equity coalitions fighting against ecosystem threats in various forms related to competition, sort of different competition that happens when that can be threatening to ecosystems, disturbance in the way that ecosystems can be disturbed, and stress. There are examples of each of these sort of different types of ecosystem threats that I have outlined in the book. And all of these things kind of come together across, this energy, the diversity and resilience of healthy digital equity ecosystems that really helps to sustain them over time.
Mm-hmm. Gina, you want to hop in here?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. So a lot, I think what your responses boiled down to is just like people, like we need people. Our work is powered by people. Our work supports people. With it said, it takes a lot of energy for us all to keep going, right? Resiliency is one thing, but like sustainability is really under threat here. And I'm not just being alarmist. I see it every day. We see like folks losing their jobs, and we see organizations that no longer exist that existed a year ago. Funding is being cut. And so, Colin, I guess my question to you is like a lot of coalitions form in a crisis and dissolve once the money or urgency is going away. But we really need them to be there. in perpetuity, you know? And so what keeps an ecosystem alive between crises? So it's not starting from scratch every time when federal policy fails to deliver.
So going back to a piece that I mentioned, but really is the thing that I think carries this work forward, are not just the individual people, but it's the quality of relationships that they have, right? So for example, in Essex County in Massachusetts, which was one of the 5 case studies, the coalition, before working on digital equity, was working on the response to the gas explosion that happened. For some of you who know, in 2018, there was a huge explosion. It was terrible in Essex County. Many people got impacted. It brought the community together, right, in a crisis, which happens, and coalitions form during those crises, right, as you mentioned. But it was the quality of those relationships that when COVID-19 hit, those relationships had been built and they were able to more actively activate to respond to the digital inequalities during the COVID-19 crisis. So it's really about, I mean, very seriously, we're talking about, and I think it's very clear on this call today, it's really about community. But what I try to do in my research is to try to study and understand what that actually means. What I heard from the coalitions that I work to, it's about community building. It's about community capacity building, right? Building the capacity of community to respond and to engage and activate when there are crises. But it's also community power building in the ways that, again, Elisa was talking about. This is about power. Who has power and who doesn't have power? The quality of relationships, when people kind of feel and understand they've been listened to and heard, will activate them, and that is where power can be built. So in those pieces, but at the end of the day, it's about, again, quality of relationships, right? So just finally, what I want to just mention to your question, Gina, is like, you know, in the book I say the book is not about the digital divide, right? It's really about people and communities that have come together to address technological inequality and social injustice in the same ways that we're seeing now with people organizing, you know, against data centers and flock police surveillance cameras. But it's really, you know, at the end of the day, this is about, you know, organizing towards justice. And I think that, you know, the thing that keeps ecosystems alive in between crises is the same belief that Dr. King had in terms of the belief of people and communities to work together towards creating a better world. And we need to believe that if we're going to do this work and get us through these periods of time when funding is a real question.
No, that's good stuff, Colin. Thank you for sharing that. And we're gonna I want to go back to Krista for just this one last question, and then we're gonna kind of wrap it up. And then I think we'll do it with just one question to Krista, and then we've got a couple of just quick responses from the panel before we bring this in for a landing. Because Krista, I wanted to go to you because you actually are dealing with a real live example of what we're talking about here. With, you know, it's not a hypothetical for Vermont. So, you know, Christine Halquist, who is the executive director of the Vermont Community Broadband Board, called your CUD model a bottom-up sandbox. I love that phrase. The state wants to replicate using the what's now frozen, these BEAD non-deployment funds. The non-deployment funds are essentially sort of the leftover money from the BEAD dollars to address gaps, whether it be in network connectivity or digital skills, et cetera, with MDUs or what have you. So if that money never comes, what happens to the replication plan for hubs like Groton?
Well, in an ideal world, we will be able to leverage some non-deployment funds, right? But given the uncertainty, we certainly didn't rest there or plan on that. And so you just can't hope that it's going to happen. So we work to find other potential partnerships. And just this week, we received a preliminary notification, so nothing's signed, but that we had submitted a grant with a local and a regional hospital to the Rural Health Transformation grant funding in Vermont. And so in partnership with Mamava, who they purchased TalkBox, they supply the privacy pods that we're talking about. We are going to do a pilot of 5 more pods. But the importance of that pilot is not just that there's going to be 5 more pods, it's getting this concept to sustainability. And that's what we need to do if we want to bridge these crises when funding moves in and out, is find that. And so the pilot will help fund software that allows for easy scheduling, that connects to the hospital systems, that connects to the court system. And it's geared towards people who may not use the internet or know how to use the internet because they're elderly or they just don't have that experience. And I think at the end of the day, what that's going to do is bring to pass the human dignity that Alyssa talked about. It's going to, bring some of the sustainability that that Colin talked about. And I think that there's a reason it's called a pilot, right? We don't know that we're going to get to this and be successful in establishing sustainability, but we have a conceptual plan on how to get there. And that's because of the partnerships and the coalitions that we've built.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, man. Gina, so maybe we should go to the sort of quick lightning response. I got so many more questions. I wanted to ask Alyssa to tap into her deep policy background a little bit, but we want to be respectful of the time. And so maybe we should, what do you think? We move to the, we want to ask each of the panelists a quick question. So I think we'll close this out well.
I think so. Sorry, guys. We always go through this where we're just like, we try to get so much in. And so I'm just going to ask the last question and then we will do closings. So my question to everyone, so I'd like everyone to spend a minute to think about this question a year from now at the MLK anniversary edition of this webinar. What's the one piece of evidence you'd want to be able to point to that says the beloved connected community is closer, not further away? Who wants to go first, I guess? Well, I said I give everyone a minute to think about it.
I'm happy to jump in. I'd love to hear digital equity success stories from organizations working across the nation's most digitally disconnected states that really help make the case for strategic investments in this work. I think that's what a year from now, what I'd like to see.
I think I'd like to see the success of our pilot to demonstrate sustainability, because then we can just roll it out to like every town that has, community, like 200 of our 240 towns are inside of a communication union district. And if with the partnerships of hospitals and the state court system and businesses that we can sustain the ongoing operational costs of these pods, then we have unlocked an opportunity for low-income folks and frankly for folks across the spectrum to access these digital resources that they don't have today in their communities.
And Colin?
Yeah, I'll just say, there's a real opportunity right now through the organizing, against data centers, but also all the amazing work that's happening in the digital equity community around technology refurbishing, that we're pointing to evidence that shows us that we're making even more ties with the connection between digital equity, environmental justice, and other ways that we can really make sure that our natural world is protected in this work for a long time moving forward as well. So. Wow.
Well, listen, that was a fascinating discussion. We obviously could continue. There was a lot there to unpack, and which I should take a moment to let folks know that when we finish this live stream, it will be canonized and saved, and you can go back to it and see it on YouTube. And we'll be providing those links for folks who are here. So we should probably thank our roundtable guest and our other guest. And I just want to say, as we bring this in for a close, that Martin Luther King didn't end his most famous speech asking people to wait patiently for change. He ended it with urgency. So here's our ask to our audience. If you walked away from today with one thing that you're going to do differently, join a coalition, push your state on modernization standards, show up at a community meeting, whatever it is, share it with us in the chat, please. And also, that reminds me to say, Jordan, can you put the QR code for the survey? Because we always love to get feedback on how we make these Building for Digital Equity events really focused and something that folks want to explore. Gina, you want to take us out of here?
Okay. Before we leave, I'd like to share with you some information about upcoming National Digital Inclusion Week. So we'd love for you to join us for National Digital Inclusion Week. It's an annual nationwide event dedicated to raising awareness about digital equity and the vital importance of inclusion in our increasingly digital world. This week-long event showcases the collective efforts to bridge the digital divide and highlight the impactful work being done to ensure everyone has access to technology and the internet. This year, DIW takes place October 4th through 10th. And yeah, that is what I have for today. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I forgot how could I forget. Thank you. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Colin, Alyssa, and Krista. Thank you for grounding today's conversation in real research and communities and your work talking to communities. Thank you to Christine for the insightful look at the MLK Boulevards and Lindsay for breaking down what real modernization is. Thank you to the ILSR team who does a ton of work in front of the camera and behind the scenes to make this happen. Thank you to the NDIA team who helped me behind the scenes as well. Y'all the best. To everyone watching, thank you for refusing normalcy, for joining us today. We'll see you at the next Building for Digital Equity live stream. This has been great. Thank you, Sean. Oh, and thank you to my wonderful co-host, Sean. You are amazing.
Oh, man, I love being here. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.